Shalom. Many blessings to you in Messiah Yeshua's name. I pray that this teaching will be a blessing to you as we look at the topic of the lost tribes of Israel and the importance of understanding Joseph with regards to them. And this is because, as we've discussed before, this house was also was called Joseph, and this because Ephraim, from whom came the kings of this kingdom, Ephraim was Joseph's preeminent son. So who was Joseph? Well, Joseph's mother, her name was Rachel, and she was pledged to be married to Jacob. But Leah, her sister, through deception, cut Rachel off from the covenant by sleeping with Jacob covertly on his wedding night that he was meant to be having with Rachel. And Jacob, although deceived, he would choose to respect that Leah was in fact the eldest, and in mercy he would accredit the 7 years he had worked for Rachel to Leah. And Jacob would work another 7 years to honor his word to Rachel, to be a wife, not a handmaid, but a wife worthy of her own house aside from Leah. And God would choose that right at the origins of the story of Israel, the literal DNA of Jacob's family was built on friction, this issue of rival wives seeking supremacy over each other. And not just this, these were sisters, something actually forbidden by the Torah. And by the great plan of God, this hatred would be perpetuated in God, giving dominance to both sisters through Judah, the literal seed of Leah, as a tribe having his brothers bow down to him as the older brother, carrying Jacob's authority. And then on the other hand, you have Joseph, the son of Rachel, who would have his brothers bow down to him as one representing Jacob's economic and bounty of fertility. And the word of God really does not return void. And centuries later, we can read in 1 Chronicles, "For Judah prevailed above his brethren, and of him came the chief ruler. But the birthright was Joseph's." When Israel became a kingdom under David of Judah, it would seem that he respected the economic advantage that God had given to Joseph in the bountiful lands of the north. At this time, there was respect for each other, and the nation was internally happy. This is why the Messiah in Ezekiel 37 is called David. It was possible for just Judah's scepter to rule and Joseph be respected. But David was unique in this way. After Melech David, we have King Solomon of Judah, and he would institute forced labor on his fellow Israelites. And at the death of King Solomon, all of Israel would gather with Jeroboam, a son of Joseph, to ask for the forced labor burden to be removed from the people. And it doesn't seem as though he was even looking to split the kingdom, but even said there, "And we will serve you." Rehoboam's response was very harsh, and he even threatened to increase the forced labor on the nation. And as much as Judah did not respect Joseph's blessing with regards to bounty, Joseph did not respect the elder brother. And Jeroboam would become their first king, and he responded with a severity that showed he had no respect for the holy things of God that God had placed in the eldest son's hands. What we see is that the house of Joseph would be built on the idea of not a citizen, not an animal, not a tithe, not an offering was to go down south. And this would have an effect on the priests, Jerusalem, the poor, and most importantly, it would have no regard for the house of God. New religious centers were made in Bethel and Dan with golden calves, and the syncretism was so bad that the ministering Levites who were up in the north, the only holy element of this kingdom, they would head south, putting even more financial pressure on the house of Judah. At the end of this, Joseph would have a spiritual problem and Judah had an economic problem. Now, the leaders of Judah would appear to hatch an idea to have an overflowing scourge pass through the land, but stop short of destroying them. They would do this with lies and falsehood as a plan hidden away. We read of this in Isaiah 28. Wherefore hear the word of Jehovah, you scornful men that rule this people, which is in Jerusalem, because you have said, we have made a covenant with death, and with hell are we at agreement. When the overflowing scourge shall pass through, it shall not come unto us, for we have made lies our refuge, and under falsehood have we hid ourselves. Now, some believe that just as Leah used darkness to get Rachel out of the covenant, and just as Judah got Ishmael to remove Joseph to Egypt, some believe that Judah worked some clever politics with a vassal treaty with Assyria to deport the house of Joseph. It's certainly possible, and I can say it certainly fits the pattern. However, as with all things, God himself baked in this hatred, and no matter how evil things would get, this is all in accordance with the plan of God. Ezekiel chapter 11. Son of man, your brothers, even your brothers, your kinsmen, the whole house of Israel, all of them, and those of whom the inhabitants of Jerusalem have said, go far from Jehovah, to us this land is given for a possession. Therefore say, thus says the Lord Jehovah, though I removed them far off among the nations, and though I scattered them among the countries, yet I have been a sanctuary to them for a while in the countries where they have gone. So as Joseph said, in Egypt, when realizing betrayal has these blessings, he would say, but as for you, you thought evil against me, but God meant it unto good, to bring to pass as it is this day, to save much people alive. Although many think of the 10 tribes as forever forsaken, let us remember the faithfulness of God to Jacob's will for the birthright to go to Rachel's seed. And the only reason that Joseph really got anywhere in Egypt, let's just remember, was because, and Jacob realized this, El Shaddai watched over Joseph in Egypt. Don't lose sight that God said here in Ezekiel that he was a sanctuary for the Joseph nation on the far sides of the Assyrian Empire. And this would always be, we see time and time again, through God's preeminent messenger, the Son of God, watching over these things. And he blessed Joseph and said, God, before whom my fathers Abraham and Isaac did walk, the God which fed me all my life long unto this day, the messenger which redeemed me from all evil, bless the lads, and let my name be named on them, and the name of my fathers Abraham and Isaac, and let them grow into a multitude in the midst of the earth. Without realizing it, through the plague of death that came, the leaders of Judah would actually advance the task of Joseph. Just remember that if Judah and his brothers had never sold Joseph into slavery into Egypt, the world would have suffered mass starvation. But the whole world partook of the blessings of Israel, not through Judah, but through the rejected life of the son of the birthright. And so too, Judah, without knowing it, would sow a brother into Halah, Habor, Hara, and Gozan to be another blessing for the world. In them becoming Lo Ruhamah and Lo Ami, they would lose their covenant and identity to reap, as we've been seeing, a commonwealth of Israel, this being contractually fulfilled in the death of Israel's Messiah. The cost was that Joseph's seed would have no idea who the heck they were. Just like Joseph's kids in Egypt meeting Jacob after many years and being informed of their true origins, so it would be with these 10 tribes. They were destined to have zero understanding of their place in Jacob, but in the end days would come to their senses and be restored to this full understanding. Hosea 2, for their mother has played the whore, she who conceived them has acted shamefully, for she said, I will go after my lovers who give me my bread and my water, my wool and my flax, my oil and my drink. Therefore I will hedge up her way with thorns, and I will build a wall against her so that she cannot find her paths. So the big question, who are these people today? What became of the tribes? And this is not easily answered. But it seems as though there are some ideas that are beyond wild speculation and fanciful, wishful thinking. A healthy look will start at the beginning. And according to the Bible, the Assyrians deported the tribes to Halah, Habohara, and to the river Gozan. And some have interpreted this as a singular phrase, and that these names are just explaining different elements of a single region. And this has led many to view the place of Haran, which has a Chabur river and a Gayozan nearby, and this has become a popular view. But at the end, it just yields nothing and ends up being a fruitless endeavor. The problem is that historically, people minimize this house of Israel. But Joseph became a significant nation in Canaan. Archaeology is proving that they were spiritually bankrupt, but they were an economically powerful force in the region. So I really believe these three designations could easily be separate kingdoms that were needed to house the northern kingdom. And there are a few reasons why we should see them in that way. Secondly, it makes little sense that a tyrant empire would settle slaves in a fertile region of the Levant. Thirdly, Assyria had a lot of enemies, and they were known to place deported nations onto the border regions of the empire in buffer zones between significant enemies. And lastly, the goal of the Assyrian deportation of nations was so that they would never go back home. In other words, you take them to the most strategic, furthest part of the empire, where a return wouldn't even be an option. I believe all these criteria are met in Sir Isaac Newton's The Chronology of Ancient Kingdoms, amended, and I have no idea why scholars say biblically the place of deportation cannot be this far east. In Newton's scheme, Halah is easily identified as a conquered kingdom to the north of Assyria, lying between them and Urartu in the Gordian Mountains. Habohara is viewed as a designation for the Chaboris Mountains, today the Zagros, in the buffer zone between Assyria and Media, and Gozan is viewed as what Ptolemy referred to as Gozania, which extended to the Caspian Sea between Urartu and Media. And Newton locates these names as separate small kingdoms on the borders of the Neo-Assyrian Empire and in the buffer zones. It makes better sense, in my opinion. Now, some may scoff at this idea because we don't see Israelite names emerge anywhere in this area. There have been some attempts to try and connect Hebrew names to the peoples of this area, but this often feels like a bit of a stretch. It's like trying to find the Hebrew connection to Zaphnath-Paaneah. Sometimes you just have to realize that Joseph got a Gentile, non-Hebrew designation as prophesied to be as considered as a regular Gentile nation. With regards to the name problem, let's not forget that the Assyrians were masters in not just removing people from the lands, but also removing their identities. And one of the ways in which they did this was to call any new settlers of a land by the names of the former inhabitants that they were sent to replace. And this is what happened to those who replaced the 10 tribes in the land. The Assyrians used to call Joseph Samaria after its capital city. The new foreign imports who replaced the Israelites would be called Shomronim, Sumerians or Samaritans, even though they had zero Josephite blood. And for this reason, like Joseph became Zaphnath-Paaneah in Egypt, I think the Bible-believing world must open its mind to the Joseph nation being very likely renamed with the names of the former people of these kingdoms who were deported and Joseph settled within. Newton's Hala would have the forced deportation of Camarians, Habor Hara, the removal of Camarians and Scythians, and Gozan, the removal of Scythians. Although history would also speak of these people as still continuing after this fact. And so let us open our minds that just like Sumerians prior to 722 BC were Israelites, but afterwards were a different people, so too, if respecting the pattern, this would mean that Camarians and Scythians before 722 BCE were most likely genuine Camarians and Scythians. But after 722 BCE, these were most likely Israelites under those names. Now, what's interesting is that the old Camarians were of Gomer, a son of Japheth. And Camarian is a version of Gomerian. And Scythian comes from Ashkuz, or Ashkenaz, Ishkuz, Gomer's firstborn son. And this brings up the Lo Ami, not recognizable Israelite identity, and perhaps how that came about. Remember that Hosea was called to have children who represented the house of Israel, and this was through him getting involved with the prostitute called Gomer, to whom he would not give his name or recognition to. And this is a strange situation, but even publications from the Royal Danish Society, and they would even be re-examining the identity of these Gomer descriptions for these people in this area and at this time, and would come to the conclusion of them being primarily deported Israelites. This is without biblical bias. This is just straight scholarship with issues in Herodotus's confusing mess of trying to figure out who are these people. Now, I am as biased as you can get, but hopefully I have enough integrity to not get too carried away. But let us not forget God telling Ezekiel in Babylon that he had been a sanctuary for the tribes in outer darkness. And like Joseph would rise from insignificance because of the hand of God, I think we should not underestimate God's provision for Joseph in these lands. Now, concerning the Camarian Scythians, the group post 722 BC, there are some remarkable achievements as they progress to the Black Sea. Herodotus, called the father of history, he would say of these Gomer-related people, around 400 BC. The Scythians are by far the most numerous of all the peoples who live in the north, and they are very warlike. They conquered a vast territory and made it their own. Strabo, he said, this Greek geographer, the Scythians were originally a small people, but they had the most remarkable increase in their power due to their bravery and the fertile lands they acquired. Diodorus Siculus, another ancient historian, he would say, the Scythians rose from obscurity to become one of the most formidable powers of their time with their rapid expansion and dominance over the region. Okay, so although you may not think of Joseph as warring or of nomadic existence, this is in keeping with the biblical prophecies for them. And never underestimate the hand of the one in the burning bush to guide the course of history and guard and prosper who you may think should have died out. In Deuteronomy 33, Moses would again put the special guardianship over Joseph's seed. And for the precious things of the earth and fullness thereof, and for the goodwill of him that dwelt in the bush, let the blessing come upon the head of Joseph, and upon the top of the head of him that was separated from his brethren. His glory is like the firstling of his bullock, and his horns are like the horns of unicorns. With them he shall push the people together to the ends of the earth. These are the 10,000s of Ephraim, and they are the thousands of Manasseh. 700 years after the deportation, the great Jewish historian who was given the name Josephus, so I'm sure he had an interest in the topic, he would say, now the two tribes are those of Judah and Benjamin, which are called Jews. The 10 tribes are beyond the Euphrates until now and are an immense multitude and not to be estimated by numbers. I don't really want to get into more about details about possible migrations, but I obviously will support any of those who are tracing in good faith the possible fulfillment of Joseph as renamed in certain descendants of Gomer, especially those that would appear to push the nations to the ends of the earth. Time will give a clearer picture as God will choose to remove the hedges and the thorn bushes for a prodigal destined to come to his senses. All I know is don't listen to ideas of 10 tribes as having fulfillment in people with small numbers and little wealth. Just because a group converts to Judaism, it does not make them descendants of Israel. Okay? Calling the 10 tribes lost Jews is replacement theology and an oxymoron. The scourge completed in 722 BCE that was meant for evil, God would work for the good. Branches were cut off, but it was so that the Messiah could extend the covenant. As much as Joseph is an intriguing matter, all nations must choose to be on the right side of history. Let no one, as Paul says, think more highly of themselves as they ought to, and also let us not think less of others. Rehoboam and Jeroboam are a classic example of the problems that arise from such arrogance. Let us respect that the Messiah has chosen to stay in covenant with some people who, by man's judgment, should be cut off for selling their birthright brother at multiple times in history. For others, they may not get why Messiah would help to seek out those who were lost, who at a time they couldn't care for the temple of their own God, and let the very holy things of God starve and hunger for the sake of their selfish prosperity. I'm reminded of what Paul said in the context of Jews who in the first century thought that God made certain people clean so that they could now have salvation. Paul would lay the facts out straight. God has handed all people over to disobedience that he may have mercy on all. Jacob can choose deceptive Leah despite her covert actions, should he choose. He can choose to also honor commitments to Rachel and work another 7 years, should he also choose that. What's important is not how we think the Father's will should be, but to respect the will of the Father. The same goes with Judah and Joseph. Jacob could choose, if he wanted to give a great blessing to Judah. This full knowing that Judah was there, and it was actually his idea to sell Joseph to the Ishmaelites. The Father's will is what is important. And so too, if Jacob wanted to give the birthright to Rachel's seed, then respect your dad's decision concerning who wears that ornate cloak. This despite him marrying into the sun worship of Heliopolis, and that he did the divination of Laban, and that he is the son of the wife who brought idols into the land. Isaiah says that Messiah will return and he will bring peace between the warring factions of Israel. The firstborn of David, a stumbling block to both houses of Israel, we will know him, because he will get Leah and Rachel to get along. He will get Judah and Ephraim, Joseph, to respect each other's role. May the Son of God help us deeply understand our places as people, that we will love the covenant and the Sabbaths, and show forth the praise of him who has drawn us out of darkness into his marvelous light. To the house of Judah, may your Messiah reveal himself more and more, and soon may your leaders in Jerusalem say, Baruch haba b'shem Jehovah, and may he set his dwelling within your midst. And to the 10 tribes, may your exile and curses be over soon. And to the commonwealth of Israel, may your voices be heard from every tongue, language, and nation as you raise your voice declaring that there is but one God, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Much love to all Yisrael. Shalom.